And now we're ready to integrate our data. On the upload page, we uploaded our data as is into the MarkLogic Data Hub. On the connect page, we drew a model for how we want to integrate, interact, and visualize our data once we connect it. Now on the integrate page, we can now map those raw sources to that model we created and integrate that data and then visualize it and explore it in the Explore tab. The Integrate tab allows us to create mapping steps for mapping our sources to our target model, as well as mastering steps for entity deduplication and disambiguation. Let's get started. On the Integrate page, we can create a pipeline composed of steps for processing our data. We're going to add a step as we're prompted, and we're going to call it Map Person. Now we know we have person entities and we have person data. The step type will define as type mapping. Our options here are to map, which will allow us to map our source data to our target model, and matching and merging for mastering, which we'll come back to later. When we talk about the entity type, the list of entities come directly from our model, and we know we're going to map person entities. And then for our data source, we only have one, but we could choose our data source here, which is also listed. We've loaded our providers.csv. So let's map that source to this target. We save the step, and a best guessed attempt at mapping is immediately displayed. What we're seeing here are on the left are the property names as they exist in the model, and on the right, those same names have been used to create the mappings, but we can just get rid of these. We see for NPI, and NPI, it seems that our source and target, the source attribute and the target attribute, both have the same name and same character case, and so we're seeing a preview of the value for this National Provider Identifier number. For practices at, this is just a relationship. For site ID, let's just get rid of this. If we click on this, we'll see all the essentially source attributes available to us for mapping. And so for last name, we're going to map last name, and we immediately see Jeffrey. And if we go to site ID, we can scroll down to site ID, and we see the site ID displayed as well. Now, we have this, essentially we've mapped our source to the data. Remember, this is an iterative incremental approach to data integration. We can go to our model and add more attributes. We can come back here and we can add more mappings. But with what we have, we can actually integrate and go look at this data immediately. So let's run a step, and let's just run our person step. And down in the right, we see that we're starting step execution, and we've run. And if we go to the Explore tab, we'll now see person entities. The data that we've integrated has been mapped to our entities, and we see them in the system. And we can traverse these and we can search these. But let's make it more interesting. Let's call this next step Map Facilities. And it's another mapping step. And we know it's the facility entity. And we're actually using the same data source. We'll save this. All right. We have a few more attributes to map here. Just clearing those out. Now this left menu, right, we know that this shows us all the attributes available for the source data to the target. For those that are interested, this right menu allows us, exposes a whole bunch of built-in functions, essentially, that are available to us if we want to do more with this data. We can parse dates, concatenate, we can do lookup tables, and so that can be very useful too for doing more with our data as we do cleanup. We'll maybe highlight that in a different video. But right now, we're just going to go through and map these attributes. And we have site ID to site ID. And as we do it, we're seeing the values displayed for us. And we see site name, and we see site name. And we see, oh, but that's not the state we want, because that's the person state. We actually want the site state. Right? It looks like we have the values we're looking for on the right. So we can run this as well, and we can choose what steps we want to run. We've already run map person, so we'll just run map facilities. Down below, we should get a little prompt that tells us that facilities, the harmonization is taking place. Our source data is being mapped to that model, and we go to Explore, and we look at the update. We now see our persons, and we can see persons. Like here we have Claes at site I-88 connected with Mercy Hospital, and we see Mercy Hospital information, and we see Mercy Hospital information, And we notice that, hey, we have duplicate entities. Well, this is a great reason to use smart mastering. So we'll look at that next. So we just saw how simple it is to integrate data using the integrate page by creating some mapping steps. Essentially, on the integrate page, we can create a pipeline for processing composed of mapping or mastering steps. In the next video, we'll look at mastering. You might not need it though, right? This is, in our case, we have some entities we're going to need to deduplicate. And so we'll take a look at how we do that with mastering. But to get started, we just have to create a mapping step. And in that mapping step, we'll be able to map our source data attributes to connect model property names. There are additional built-in functions available for additional data processing. But right out of the gate, we can just map our sources to the model. We can run that step and we can immediately validate and explore. At this point, if you've mapped your sources to the model and you want to look at more into Explore, check out the Explore video. Otherwise, we'll continue with our integrate journey by looking at smart mastering.